What would you do if you discovered that the animals you watch every day are also watching you? The images you are about to see were recovered from security cameras, personal devices, and police files related to events that occurred at the municipal zoo between September and October of last year. Some scenes were reconstructed from witness statements and found diary entries. The names were withheld at the request of families still seeking answers. For 103 years, the municipal zoo served as a portal where humans could observe animals in controlled environments. Living showcases where wild creatures were studied, admired, and, some would say, imprisoned. A place where the line between observer and observed always seemed clear and defined, until that line started to disappear. There are places in the world where reality goes awry, where the fabric that separates the natural from the supernatural phrase like old fabric. The municipal zoo was one of those places. Although no one knew about it for more than a century, nobody except the animals. Authorities officially classified the events as a case of collective delirium caused by work stress, combined with isolated cult behavior. Police reports have been filed. The families received compensation in exchange for silence. The demolition was completed before any serious investigation could be carried out. But the images remain, the diaries remain, and 6 people are still missing. What happened in the last days of the municipal zoo defies any conventional explanation. Was it an awakening, a metamorphosis, or a simple return to a state that existed long before humans drew clear lines between species? One thing is certain. What began as subtle behavioral anomalies culminated in a transformation that continues to spread beyond the zoo's now demolished walls. And perhaps the most disturbing thing is not what happened that last night of the new moon. Perhaps what is truly terrifying is the possibility that what we see in zoos around the world, the long glances, the repetitive routines, the apparent gestures of recognition, is just the surface of something much deeper happening when we look away. What do animals do when we think we are not looking? What do they see when they look at us through the bars we have built to separate them from us? What if those railings were never really needed? The story you are about to witness begins with one man, a dedicated zookeeper who was the first to realize that something impossible was happening. And it ends with a community that is neither entirely human nor entirely animal, hidden in the woods beyond the city. In the last words of Marco Alves' diary, when you think you are watching, ask yourself, who is really being watched? Method: 2 September 27th, 5:48 a.m. The sky is still dark. Temperature of 8 degrees. Security cameras at the municipal zoo captured Marco Alves, head caretaker for 22 years, beginning his morning routine as he had done for more than 2 decades. Marco walked the familiar paths of the zoo, steam rising from his coffee cup as he consulted his clipboard. His face showed the wear and tear of sleepless nights, deep circles under his eyes, an incipient beard. It wasn't just the imminent closure of the place he had dedicated his life to that consumed him. It was something more. The footage shows Marco stopping abruptly on the path between the primate and feline enclosures. The glass falls from his hand. Coffee spills on the cement floor. Your clipboard suffers the same fate. My God, they did it again. What Marco saw that morning would be dismissed as impossible by any rational person. In the enclosures that surrounded it, each animal remained completely still, like wax statues. A leopard frozen in a completely unnatural upright position. Monkeys placed in perfect geometric formations. The tropical birds were lined up in exact size order on the perches. They weren't dead. They weren't sleeping. They were waiting. The audio recording found on Marco's phone that morning reveals his mental state. This is my 3rd documentation of nocturnal behavior. It's happening more frequently now, almost every night, and they're getting more coordinated, more human. None of the other employees believe me. They think I'm overreacting because of the closure, that I'm looking for reasons to save this place. But that's not all. What's happening here is beyond my understanding, and I'm sure it's related to the demolition. Somehow, they know. What makes this case extraordinary is not only Marco's testimony, but the irrefutable visual evidence. At 6:14 a.m., Marco returned to the security office and retrieved the footage from the previous night. What he found defies any known scientific explanation. Cameras 7, 12, and 19, covering different areas of the zoo, captured images that would forever change Marco's understanding of animal consciousness. From 2:37 a.m., when the security guard from last night completed his patrol, the behaviors began. First, the chimpanzees. One by one, they stood on their hind legs and began to walk upright, with a posture that neurobiologists would later describe as eerily humanoid. This was not the occasional imitation seen in primates. It was a coordinated and deliberate move. In the elephant area, the matriarch used her trunk with surgical precision to manipulate fallen branches, weaving them into structures that served no known natural purpose, structures that looked eerily like miniature zoo buildings. Even more disturbing, predators and prey that would normally need to be separated were seen interacting through adjacent gratings. A lion and a zebra performed mirror movements, as if in a coordinated dance. The images show the lion extending its paw through a small opening, and the zebra voluntarily approaching it, touching it with its nose in a gesture that suggests deliberate communication. At 3:42 a.m., the activity intensified. The images, although grainy, clearly show dozens of different species holding what can only be described as a gathering. Animals that could be seen between enclosures maintained constant visual contact. Those who couldn't seemed to communicate, using standardized vocalizations. Marco's shaky narration superimposed on the footage reveals his growing discomfort. They're communicating, not how we would expect animals to communicate. It's not just instincts or reactions. There's an intentionality here, a deliberation. Look at the way the flamingos move in perfect synchronization, as if they were one mind. See how the orangutan is using signals that we haven't taught it. And those gestures the wolf is making with its paw, they almost seem like instructions. As the sun began to rise at 5:21 a.m., the images show all the animals simultaneously returning to their usual positions. Not gradually, not in sequence, all at the same time, like actors at the end of a performance. And then, the complete stillness that Marco would discover minutes later. Marco's files contain more than 2 weeks of similar observations, increasingly detailed, increasingly impossible. At first, he believed he was documenting isolated anomalous behavior, but the connection to the zoo's impending closure has become undeniable. In his recording from September 20th, Marco notes, "The curator found the demolition plans torn up this morning. They were locked in the administrative office. That same day, I found macaw feathers in the exact same configuration as the demolition diagram. It's no coincidence. They know what's coming. They're planning something. Why didn't anyone else notice?" The evidence suggests that the animals were extremely cautious. Security records that they always returned to idle exactly 17 minutes before any scheduled tour. They seem to have memorized the guards' schedules. The only reasons Marco was able to capture these images were his increasing insomnia and the secret installation of additional cameras that were not included in the official system. As the zoo went about its business that morning of September 27, no one realized the profound impact the images would have on Marco. In just 3 days, the zoo would close permanently. In 4 days, the demolition would begin. And apparently, the animals were counting away. 3. The municipal zoo was not just a place of work for Marco Alves. It was the epicenter of his existence. Founded in 1920 as part of the city's modernization plan, the zoo had been a symbol of prestige and education for more than a century. Generations grew up visiting these enclosures, observing creatures they would never see in nature, learning about a natural world increasingly distant from urban reality. Now, ruthless headlines announced its end. Zoologico Centenario gives space to a commercial complex. Last great zoo in the region closes its doors. Real estate development will replace historic attraction. The value of the land had exceeded the value of the institution. The cold mathematics of real estate developers did not consider sentimental or historical value. In an interview granted months before the critical events, Marco expressed his despair in a restrained way. "I have dedicated my life to this place. I know every animal by name. I know their stories, their habits, their personalities. Many were born here in my care. I talk about transferring them as if they were just inventory items, but they are lives. They are relationships built over decades. The zoo's decline had not been sudden. Budgets have been cut for years. The venues that needed renovation became obsolete. Positions were never replaced after retirements. Visitors declined as new technological distractions competed for the attention of younger generations. And a growing awareness of animal welfare questioned the very existence of zoos as an institution. This was the context when the strange behaviors began. Initially subtle, easily dismissed as coincidences or projections, of a team emotionally shaken by the impending closure. An excerpt from Marco's diary, dated September 10th, marked the beginning. "The giraffes kept eye contact with me for 47 minutes. Today, they didn't look away even once. The wolves howled in timed intervals of exactly 7 minutes throughout the night. Elena, head veterinarian, says I'm looking for patterns where none exist. Maybe. But how do I explain the objects in the enclosures? The little arrangements of stones and sticks that no one put there?" As the zoo entered its final days, only a skeleton staff remained. Of the 42 original employees, only 11 remained, in charge of preparing the animals for their transfer to other institutions. Many rooms were already empty, creating an increasingly silent and ghostly atmosphere. It was in this scenario of progressive abandonment that two worlds began to collide, the human and the animal, as if the barrier that distinguished them was dissolving little by little. Marco's diary entries between September 12th and 15th document increasingly worrying changes. 12. I found all the enrichment toys in the fall. Tiger enclosure stacked in shapes that resemble small structures. Elena says they're just random accumulations, but the symmetry is undeniable. 9-13. Macaws now synchronize their vocalizations at exactly 2:22 p.m. every day. They last exactly 108 seconds. I recorded it for analysis. 90-14. The elephants are drawing the same symbol in the sand with their trunks. It looks like a spiral with 3 branches. I have already erased and reshaped the terrain twice. They follow the same pattern. 15. I dreamed about the animals looking at me, all lined up like in a courtroom. When I woke up at 3 a.m. and went to check the cameras, they were all awake, looking directly at the cameras, all at the same time. The last open day, September 15th, passed without ceremony or official recognition. A rainy Tuesday with only 27 registered visitors. The administration saw no reason for celebrations or farewell events. What no one noticed that day was the way the animals intensely observed each visitor, as if memorizing faces, studying behaviors, and collecting final data. Amid the growing desolation, no one paid attention to the small details, the increased nocturnal activity, the displaced objects, the unusual vocalizations. Nobody except Marco. I am increasingly convinced that they are preparing for something, he wrote on September 18th. It's not just stress behavior. It's not just a reaction to changes in routine. There's a purpose here. There's an intention. And somehow, it's all related to the new moon that coincides with the last day before the demolition. I need to understand what's coming before it's too late. His intuition was correct. But even in his deepest fears, Marco could not imagine the true nature of what was about to be revealed. Way 4As of September 19th, Marco abandoned any pretense of normality. His initial skepticism had turned into an unshakable conviction that something deeply anomalous was happening at the zoo. To systematically document the phenomenon, he converted an abandoned warehouse near the reptile pavilion into a makeshift operations center. Images recovered from Marco's laptop reveal walls covered with timelines, photographs, transcripts of animal vocalizations, and detailed maps of the zoo marked with the locations of incidents. With no official resources at his disposal, he used 6 personal security cameras purchased with his own money, strategically placed to capture areas not covered by the zoo's outdated system. In the voice recording from September 19th, we hear Marco explain his methodology. "I'm creating a systematic record of anomalous behaviors, classified into 5 categories: interspecies communication, tool use, temporal coordination, spatial mapping, and physical transformation." This last category still has little concrete data, but there are times when their postures and movements seem to change, as if they were rehearsing to be something different. The data Marco collected during this period would overwhelm even the most skeptical. In just 48 hours, he documented 37 incidents that challenge current scientific knowledge about animal cognition. The most notable thing happened on the night of September 23rd, captured by cameras 3 and 4. At 11:17 p.m., an elderly chimpanzee named Tobias was recorded manipulating a stick, apparently for no purpose. To the untrained eye, it looked like normal tool-using behavior, well documented in primates. However, upon closer inspection, Tobias wasn't just manipulating the stick. He was bending and interlacing it with frayed fibers of rope, creating a complex structure. At 23:42, Camera 4 recorded a female orangutan in a separate enclosure, closely, observing Tobias's movements through a visual gap between habitats. 20 minutes later, he began replicating the exact same interlacing technique, perfecting it. Marco's overlapping narration explains the impossible. What we are witnessing here is not just imitation, it is deliberate instruction. Tobias is slowly, step by step, demonstrating how to create this object. Notice how he pauses after each step, checking to see if Luna is following him. This is not natural behavior. It is a structured teaching process. At 01:12, Luna passes the finished tool through a small gap between the enclosures to a grey wolf in the adjacent habitat. The wolf, normally a predator that would have attacked a primate in the wild, carefully accepts the object and carries it to its group. Footage shows 5 wolves examining the object before adding it to a growing collection of similar items hidden in a depression dug beneath a rock. "They're accumulating tools," Marco whispers in the recording. "Not just using them now, but storing them for future use." This involves not only understanding utility, but also advanced temporal planning. Skeptics might argue that these were simply stereotypical behaviors resulting from the stress of prolonged confinement. But how to explain what the cameras recorded? In the early hours of September 22, at 02:34, an otter was documented using a rock to play a rhythmic tapping pattern against a metal surface. The pattern was not random. Further analysis revealed that this was a precise mathematical sequence. 3 quick beats, pause, 5 beats, pause, 8 beats. The Fibonacci sequence. Minutes later, an elephant at the other end of the zoo responded with its trunk, banging against a dead tree in exactly the same rhythmic pattern. Then, a group of birds began synchronized vocalizations that followed the same rhythm. To a casual observer, they would just be coincidences. For Marco, it was confirmation of a coordinated communication system that crossed enclosures and species. On September 23rd, he contacted Dr. Elisa Mendes, a neuroscientist specializing in animal cognition at the Federal University, and sent her some of his most compelling images. His response, attached to Marco's file, is revealing. What you are describing would be revolutionary if confirmed in a controlled environment. Interspecies communication is limited even among highly social animals, and typically restricted to signals of danger or food. An abstract communication system shared between different species is theoretically impossible without long coevolution. Even more troubling is the apparent transmission of complex knowledge. Primates can teach simple techniques to their descendants, but the level of deliberate instruction you describe, with sequential steps and checking for understanding, simply does not exist in known non-human nature. If your videos have not been manipulated, I suggest you exercise extreme caution. What you are witnessing represents an evolutionary leap that would normally take thousands of generations to develop. Marco never received a visit from Dr. Mendes. Their final response, sent on the 24th, expressed skepticism about the authenticity of the videos and recommended Marco seek professional help to cope with the stress of the impending closure. Undeterred, Marco intensified his vigilance. On the afternoon of September 25th, he installed 3 additional cameras focused specifically on areas of visual intersection between habitats. What they captured over the next 48 hours would constitute the most disturbing evidence of all. In one particularly notable sequence, at 3:14 a.m. on September 26th, an ocelot was observed drawing the dirt in its enclosure using its claws with surprising precision. The image formed unmistakably resembled the plan of a simplified zoo. Even more impressive, the ocelot marked 7 specific points on the drawing with small stones. These points correspond exactly to the places where I found the spiral. Symbols in recent weeks, Marco narrates, with a voice that now mixes admiration and fear. They're mapping the zoo. They're identifying specific points of something. Interest, energy, connection? I don't know yet. In his most controversial documentation, dated September 26th at 4:07 a.m., Marco captures what he describes as movement rehearsals. The images show several animals in their separate enclosures, simultaneously performing the same unnatural body movements. Rising on their hind legs, extending their limbs at specific angles, and performing coordinated circular movements with their heads. It's not just coordination, Marco whispers in the recording. It's a choreography, a preparation. They're practicing something specific, something synchronized. And the closer we get to the new moon, the more frequent and complex these rehearsals become. The most inexplicable behavior of all was recorded on the morning of September 27th, a few hours before the disturbing dawn that Marco would encounter. The night images show all rooms simultaneously, dividing the screen into 9 quadrants. At 4:44 in the morning, in total synchrony, all the animals in each enclosure turned their heads in the exact direction of the zoo's administrative center, where the demolition plans were kept. The last audio entry before dawn captured Marco at his most vulnerable moment. I'm not trying to prove it to anyone anymore. I'm just trying to understand. Because one thing I'm sure of, this is all related to the lockdown. It's no coincidence that these behaviors have intensified in recent weeks. They know it. Somehow they understand what's about to happen, and they're preparing. What remains to be seen? Prepare for what? Resistance? Flight? Or something I can't even imagine? His answer would come much sooner and be much more disturbing than he could ever anticipate. Method 5. The last 72 hours before the official closure of the municipal zoo revealed a dramatic escalation in the phenomena documented by Marco. What began as subtly anomalous behaviors became a coordinated symphony of activities that defied rational explanation. On September 27th, after the shocking awakening with the animals in static positions, Marco completely abandoned his official responsibilities. The transfer of the zoo's last residents to other institutions was scheduled to begin within 48 hours, but their obsession with ongoing events had become absolute. Time records show that he did not leave the zoo for 3 consecutive days and slept briefly on the worn sofa in the staff room. A chronological sequence of incidents, drawn from his meticulously organized archive, reveals the alarming progression of events. Day 27, 10:14 a.m. The first documented evidence of deliberate object sharing between species has been captured by newly installed cameras. An African grey parrot, a species known for its exceptional intelligence, was observed carrying a small, shiny metal object, later identified as a paperclip, to the edge of its enclosure. With deliberate precision, the bird dropped the object, just as an otter passed through the water channel below. The otter immediately retrieved the object, examining it before swimming directly to its shelter. Marco's narration reveals his growing perplexity. This is not random behavior. The parrot specifically waited for the otter. Note its vigilant posture, the calculated moment of release. And the otter showed no surprise. It moved with purpose, as if awaiting delivery. What we are witnessing is a deliberate exchange. Trade, if we dare use that term. Day 27, 2:38 p.m. Perhaps the most disturbing incident of this day was what Marco called a display of interspecies diplomacy. Camera 4 captured a normally territorial and aggressive 10-year-old Bengal tiger lying peacefully less than a meter from a gazelle in the adjacent enclosure. Between them, only a separating grid. Under normal circumstances, the proximity of the predator would have caused extreme panic in the gazelle. Instead, the two animals remained in relaxed proximity for 27 minutes. It's as if an agreement had been reached, Marco narrates, with a voice that mixes astonishment and discomfort. A temporary suspension of the most fundamental natural instincts. To what end? What could motivate a predator to ignore its most basic hunting impulse, or a prey to overcome its innate fear? Day 28, 02:17 a.m. Infrared night cameras recorded what Marco called the night assembly. Between 2:17 and 3:42 a.m., all of the zoo's primates, chimpanzees, orangutans, gorillas, and several smaller monkeys, were observed to position themselves at specific points in their enclosures that allowed direct visual contact with each other. For 85 minutes, they performed a series of elaborate gestures that, according to Marco's frame-by-frame analysis, followed a specific, repeatable sequence. This is not social preparation or territorial display, he points out. It is a structured communication, almost syntactic. Notice how the movements are repeated with specific variations, how each sequence receives a corresponding response from another primate. I am increasingly convinced that we are witnessing the equivalent of a planning meeting. Day 28, 11:22 a.m. A particularly significant event was observed in the waterfowl enclosure. The collection of flamingos, which normally moved in casual patterns, suddenly reorganized into a perfectly symmetrical formation. Viewed from above, the formation created a design that exactly matched the spiral symbol that Marco had documented repeating in different places in the zoo. Even more disturbing, the formation lasted exactly 27 minutes before the flamingos simultaneously dispersed. The number keeps coming up. 27, Marco whispers in the recording. September 27th is when I documented the first static behaviors in the morning. The zoo closes on September 30th. There is a countdown. Day 28, 3:45 p.m. Marco documented another disturbing phenomenon: the apparent manufacturing of increasingly complex tools. One sequence of images shows a male gorilla methodically peeling a branch, sharpening its tip, and then using it to draw in the dirt. The drawing, analyzed frame by frame, turned out to be a simplified but recognizable version of the zoo's administrative building. They are mapping, Marco concludes, not just the spaces where they live, but the entire zoo. Notice how it uses different pressures to indicate different levels of elevation. This is three-dimensional mapping. Day 28, 10:30 p.m. One of the remaining employees, Eduardo Santos, a night security guard, reported his first strange incident. The transcript of his conversation with Marco reveals the contagion of the phenomenon beyond Marco's exclusive knowledge. Edward: something strange happened last night. All the animals started making sounds at the same time, exactly at midnight. It didn't last long, maybe a minute, but it was like they were singing together. Marco: did you check the cameras? Eduardo: that's the problem. Nothing showed up. The official cameras show everything normal. But I heard it, Marco. Everyone, from the owls to the lions, vocalizing together. It was harmonious, scary. Marco: they know where the official cameras are, Eduardo. They are avoiding detection. Eduardo: what do you mean they know? They're animals, Marco. Marco: I'm not sure about that anymore. Day 29, 04:17 a.m. A disturbing revelation emerged when Marco reviewed older recordings and compared them to current behavior. Footage shows the elephants moving large rocks around their enclosures for several weeks. By analyzing the pattern of movement, Marco realized that the stones were gradually repositioning themselves to replicate the exact layout of the zoo buildings, creating a scale model of the entire complex. This took weeks, Marco's voice shakes, on the recording. Movement after movement, day after day. Long-term planning that requires precise spatial memory and sustained intention. And the most alarming thing is that it started exactly on the day the zoo's closure was officially announced. Day 29, October, 1:45 p.m. Another pattern emerged as Marco began interviewing the few remaining employees. 3 of them independently reported the same disturbing dream the night before. They were inside the enclosures being watched by the animals outside. The descriptions were consistent in specific details, including the feeling of being studied and the inability to communicate except through gestures and sounds. The mental barrier is being diluted, Marco theorizes in his private recording after the interviews. In some way, what is happening here is affecting us all. The separation between the observer and the observed flows in both directions. Day 29, 7:28 p.m. The most convincing evidence of strategic coordination was documented when Marco discovered that small objects from the administrative areas, pens, staples, pieces of architectural plans, even a small model of the new commercial complex that would replace the zoo, had been collected and methodically distributed among various enclosures. The cameras do not capture how the animals access these items. They're gathering information, Marco concludes, his voice now a mix of shock and amazement. Gathering data on plans for this location. The most disturbing thing is not that these items are being taken, but the apparent purpose behind it. Day 29, 11:42 p.m. On the penultimate night before closing, Marco's secret cameras captured what he called a dress rehearsal. For approximately 47 minutes, animals throughout the zoo engaged in a coordinated sequence of movements, vocalizations, and positions that appeared to follow a specific pattern. Viewed through multiple cameras simultaneously, the sequence was revealed to be an elaborate synchronized choreography. It's not just a show of coordination, Marco narrates, his voice almost hypnotized by what he was witnessing. It's a ritual, a preparation. Notice how the movements reflect the symbols I've documented over the past few weeks. Notice how each species brings a specific element to the whole. This is not animal behavior as we know it. It's something else. His final recording from that night reveals the mental state of a man on the verge of a transformative discovery. Tomorrow is the last full day of the zoo. New moon. Everything points to something significant happening. I can no longer look at this simply as an observer. I need to understand the origin. I need to discover why here, why now. There is a larger pattern at play, and I suspect the answer lies in the history of this place itself, in what was here before concrete, fences, and fake natural landscapes. Tomorrow I will search the city's historical archive for answers, because something tells me that what we are witnessing is not the beginning of something new, but the return of something very old. Marco did not realize then how correct his intuition was, nor how his discoveries the next day would forever alter his understanding not only of animals, but of the nature of consciousness itself. Method. The morning of September 30th, the municipal zoo's last full day before its official closure, found Marco Alves in a state of alert and exhausted. The deep dark circles under his eyes and stubble showed nights without enough sleep, but his eyes maintained an intense gleam of determination. Security cameras capture him leaving the zoo at 7:14 a.m. for the first time in 3 days. Your destination, the Municipal Historical Archive, a neoclassical building in the city centre that housed records dating back to the founding of the metropolis in the 18th century. The archive entry record shows that Marco requested access to specific documents, original plans for the zoo, archaeological records of the area before construction, and any materials related to previous structures on the site. Audio recording from his phone during the investigation reveals the internal monologue of a man connecting pieces of an ancient puzzle, Records show that before the zoo was built in 1920, the area was considered undeveloped land, but there are inconsistencies. References in official correspondence mention the need to clear the remains before construction began. Remains of what? At 1023, Marco found his first significant clue, a preliminary archaeological report from 1919, apparently archived and never published. The partially deteriorated document mentions the discovery of uncatalogued stone structures of undetermined origin during the initial reconnaissance of the land. Most intriguingly, the report included sepia photographs of stone slabs with peculiar engravings, spiral patterns identical to those Marco had documented reproduced by the animals in recent weeks. "Oh my God," we hear Marco whisper in the recording. "The symbols. They were here all along." A handwritten note in the margin of the report, barely legible due to fading, mentioned recommendation for further study of the ruins of the temple before becoming indecipherable. Marco intensified his search and requested access to older files. At 1:47 p.m., a second development occurred. A local newspaper from 1883 contained a short article about curious pagan practices observed by missionaries in the region. The text mentions a structure called Temple of Therion, where rituals of communion between man and beast were supposedly performed during new moons. The recording captures the moment of revelation. Therion, in the ancient Greek language, means wild animal. A temple dedicated to animals, or the connection between humans and animals, in the same place where decades later they would build a zoo. This cannot be a coincidence. At 3:22 p.m., Marco discovered the most significant document, a personal diary of Augusto Mendes, chief engineer of the zoo's construction, dated 1920. The annotations revealed a man increasingly disturbed by the discoveries during the excavations. March 17, 1920. Today, we discovered another chamber. The walls are covered with carvings depicting men and animals in impossible positions, half human, half beast. Dr. Silveira insists that they are merely symbolic representations, but the anatomical precision suggests that the artist believed he was depicting something real. March 24, 1920. The workers refuse to remove the central stone slabs. They say they are the way stones and that removing them would bring misfortune. Local superstition. The schedule will not allow for delays. We will incorporate the stones into the foundation as the architect suggests. Less work, anyway. April 2nd, 1920. I now dream of the symbols every night. I see animals rising like men, men bowing like animals. The foreman reported that several workers had similar visions. The local priest was called to bless the place, but privately, he told me that this place was known to the ancients as a portal where the barrier between species dissolved under the new moon. Marco meticulously photographed each document, his breathing quickening as the implications became clear. The last record he examined was a partial archaeological map of the temple, showing its original layout. Superimposing it on the modern plans of the zoo, he made the most disturbing discovery. The main habitats and enclosures had been built directly on the ceremonial sites of the ancient temple. The places where Marco had documented the most intense behaviors corresponded precisely to the ritual points on the ancient map. It wasn't a coincidence, he concludes. The zoo was deliberately built on top of the ruins, perhaps initially for convenience, but the location is too precise to be a coincidence. The 7 focal points of the temple correspond exactly to the 7 main enclosures. And most importantly, the stepping stones that Mendes mentioned were incorporated into the foundation. They have literally been under the animals' paws for more than a century. At 6:34 p.m., Marco returned to the zoo with his findings. The security camera at the entrance captures him in a phone call with an intense expression. "Elena, I need you to come to the zoo now. I found something that explains everything that's happening. No, it's not stress or imagination. The zoo was built on an ancient temple. a place where transformation rituals were performed. The animals aren't acting strange. They're responding to something that's always been here, just dormant. And the demolition is somehow waking it up. No, listen. Today's new moon isn't just any new moon. According to the records I've found, it's the first new moon of autumn exactly 103 years after the ritual stones were added to the foundation. It's a cycle, Elena. Back at his makeshift operations center, Marco compared his documented map of anomalies to the map of the ancient temple. The overlay was eerily precise. The places where the animals drew symbols, accumulated objects, and performed their rehearsals corresponded exactly to the ceremonial points of the Temple of Therion. In his last recording that afternoon, we hear Marco connecting the final pieces. The temple was dedicated to a metamorphic deity, a being who could transition between human and animal forms. According to the inscriptions translated in the archaeological report, during certain astronomical convergences, particularly specific new moons, the barrier between humans and animals became temporally fluid. The rituals were not symbolic, they were literal, temporary transformations between humans and animals. The zoo animals are responding to the energies of the temple, awakened in some way by the imminent disturbance of the foundation. The behaviors I have documented are not new developments. They are ancient memories, codes written somewhere deep beyond the DNA. More than a century living in the ritual stones, absorbing whatever energy lay dormant within them. And now, with the new moon coinciding with the century cycle, the barrier is about to thin again. It is no coincidence that the zoo closes today, with a new moon, exactly 103 years after its founding. In some ways, the cycle has always moved towards this moment. The final recording from that afternoon captures Marco in a moment of fateful clarity. I can't stop what's going to happen tonight. I'm not even sure I should, but I need to witness it. I need to understand it. And more than anything, I need to document it. Because what happens here tonight won't just be the end of a zoo. It will be the rebirth of something much older. At 1942, cameras show Marco checking his cameras one last time, preparing for the night that would change not only his life, but also his fundamental understanding of species boundaries. The new moon was rising, invisible in the night sky. And, beneath the zoo enclosures, something ancient pulsed, awakening after a century of slumber. Method, 7 September 30th, 8 p.m. The last night at the municipal zoo began with a modest farewell gathering. Security cameras capture the 7 remaining employees gathered in the administrative center. Marco, head veterinarian Elena, 3 caretakers, night security guard Eduardo, and Katerina, the administrator assigned to oversee the closure. A bottle of cheap champagne, plastic glasses, wistful conversations about shared memories. In the audio recordings, we hear fragments of the final conversations, full of forced nostalgia and underlying tension. Do you remember when Jonas the hippo ran away and we found him sleeping in the feed store? Laughs one of the bouncers, his voice slightly raised with nervousness. Or when the flamingos turned white for a week because someone prepared the wrong diet, adds another. We almost lost the pink credit card sponsorship. Tense laughter. Looks directed at the dark windows. No one mentions the strange behavior of the last few weeks. Marco remains silent, constantly checking his phone where he monitors the hidden cameras. At 9:17 p.m., while the small celebration continued, the first anomaly of the night was recorded. Marco's cameras, strategically placed in the main enclosures, capture something extraordinary. In perfect synchronization, all the animals in the zoo awaken from their apparent slumber. Not gradually, not in sequence, but all at once, as if responding to a signal inaudible to human ears. Marco's overlapping narration describes the disturbing scene. It has begun. Look at the eyes. They all opened in the same video frame. This is not natural. It is not possible for dozens of different species to follow exactly the same sleep cycle. Something woke them up simultaneously. The cycle is beginning. At 9:42 p.m., the small gathering begins to disperse. The employees, oblivious to what is happening on the premises, prepare to leave. Marco chimes in, his voice studiously casual on the security recording. "Hey, before everyone leaves, how about we do one last round together? One final walk through all the areas? To say our final goodbyes." The suggestion meets with initial resistance. It is already late. Some have a long trip home. But Marco persists and mentions unusual behaviors that he wants to show everyone. Elena, the head veterinarian who had previously dismissed Marco's concerns as stress, displays reluctant curiosity. In the end, 5 of them agree. Marco, Elena, Eduardo the security guard and 2 managers, Miguel and Sofia. Katerina, the administrator, vehemently refuses. "I've spent enough time in this depressing place. Transfers start tomorrow at 7. I'll be here early. Good night, everyone." Security cameras show Katerina leaving through the main entrance at 9:57 p.m. It would be the last time they would see her in her normal state. As the small group begins their final round, events on the ground escalate dramatically. Marco's secret: cameras capture synchronized movements throughout the zoo. Primates deliberately descend to ground level in their enclosures. Big cats positioning themselves at specific points in their habitats. The birds land in precise formations on the branches. Each animal seemed to take a designated position in an invisible choreography. At 10:23 p.m., the group arrives at the big cat enclosure. The security camera shows their surprised reaction. The 3 Bengal tigers are sitting in a perfect triangular formation, completely still, all looking directly at the humans. No movement, no reaction to the group's arrival, just intense and deliberate observation. "My God," Eleanor sighs in the recording. "You were right. This is not normal. This is not the tiger's natural behavior." "That's nothing," Marco replies. "Follow me." At 10:47 p.m., the group arrives at the chimpanzee habitat, which is normally noisy and active even at night. They find the 12 primates forming a perfect circle in the center of the enclosure, sitting upright in an almost human posture. In the center of the circle, etched into the earth, is the same spiral symbol that Marco had discovered in historical archives. "Impossible," Eleanor murmurs. "Are they posing? Is this some kind of conditioning I'm not aware of?" Marco explains his discoveries about the Temple of Therion, his voice becoming more urgent as he guides the group through the zoo, exhibiting one inexplicable behavior after another. The initial disbelief of the companions gradually turns into discomfort and then into palpable anxiety. "This can't be real," insists Miguel, the zoo's most experienced keeper. "Animals don't coordinate across species that way. It's biologically impossible." "See it with your own eyes," Marco responds. And this is just the beginning. As the group continues their journey through the enclosures, a subtle transformation begins to occur in the atmosphere of the zoo itself. Audio recordings capture sounds that are impossible to identify, neither completely animal nor completely mechanical. An almost subliminal vibration seems to emanate from the ground itself. At 11:16 p.m., the first truly inexplicable event witnessed by the entire group occurs. In the flamingo enclosure, the birds suddenly take off simultaneously, something they never do at night, forming a complex aerial pattern that looks remarkably like one of the inscriptions on ancient temples. For 108 precise seconds, they maintain the formation perfectly static, as if frozen in mid-air, before landing again in complete synchronization. The recording captures surprised exclamations from the group. "That's technically impossible," Elena whispers. Aerodynamic lift doesn't allow them to float that way. It's like gravity works differently for them. "It's not just this room." Marco directs the group's attention to other areas visible from their position. "Look, it's happening all over the zoo." Panoramic cameras show the extraordinary landscape. In every visible habitat, animals make coordinated movements that defy their natural behaviors. Elephants standing on 2 legs. Wolves arranged in perfect geometric formations. The reptiles lined up in radial patterns. At 11:34 p.m., Eduardo, the night security guard, notices something even more disturbing. The patterns are moving between enclosures. Look, the monkeys are now in the same formation as the flamingos were 5 minutes ago. It's like they're passing movements from one habitat to another. Marco consults the old temple map superimposed on the zoo plan. They are following the ritual points, the ceremonial sequence documented in the inscriptions, one by one, activating each focal point of the temple. Exactly at midnight, the event that Marco would later call the awakening begins. Security cameras throughout the zoo capture the moment. A visible vibration runs through the ground like ripples in water. Soft lights, initially mistaken for reflections, begin to emanate from the ground at 7 specific points in the zoo, exactly the points corresponding to the ceremonial circles of the ancient temple. They are the stones on the road, explains Marco urgently. The ritual slabs embedded in the foundation. They are reacting to the new moon, the cycle of the century. As the light emanation intensifies, the animals in each enclosure begin to vocalize, not in random sounds of stress, but in synchronized rhythmic patterns that create an eerie harmony, different species that contribute to a single complex sound expression. The small human group watches in silence as the phenomenon grows in intensity. At 00:17, Sophia, the youngest zookeeper, breaks the silence with a disturbing observation. Look at their eyes. All animals. Their eyes are changing. The images confirm this. The pupils of several animals are changing shape, and many of them take on a more human appearance. Not only those of primates, where such a similarity would be less surprising, but also those of felines, birds, and even reptiles. At 30, with the phenomenon growing in intensity, Marco makes a fateful decision. We need to split up to fully document this. Elena and Miguel go to the east sector, Eduardo and Sofia, west sector. I'll cover the center, where the activity seems most intense. The division of the group would mark the point of no return. The cameras follow each couple heading to their designated areas, while Marco heads alone to the administrative center, the location his research identified as corresponding to the central altar of the Temple of Therion. The sequence of events between 0042 and 0117 is documented by multi-camera clips and partial audio recordings. What emerges is the portrait of a progressive transformation that is taking over the zoo. In the eastern area, Elena and Miguel witness how elephants manipulate complex ritual objects with their trunks with impossible precision. It's like his trunks have fingers, Eleanor whispers in the recording. The footage shows the two staring, mesmerized, getting closer than security protocol would allow. In the western sector, Eduardo and Sofia document wolves arranging rocks in specific patterns, using their paws in ways that suggest more flexible joints than normal. Sofia's final audio transmission contains her final observation. They're not just acting like humans, they're changing. At 0123, cameras in the administrative center capture Marco descending into the rarely used basement. There, directly below the main office, he removes the floor access panels, revealing what appears to be an ancient stone slab carved with the same spiral symbol documented throughout the zoo. When the new moon reaches its astronomical peak, invisible in the sky, but at the highest point of its path, the stone begins to emit a pulsating bluish luminosity. The audio captures Marco's amazed whisper. The central altar, the stone of ascension. It is active after a century. At 1:37 a.m., all of the zoo's animals begin to move simultaneously, with each enclosure participating in an elaborate synchronized ballet. Viewed through multiple cameras, the movements are revealed as parts of a larger single pattern, a choreographed ritual that spans the entire zoo. Ancient temple symbols are formed and transformed through coordinated movement between species. At 0154, the phenomenon reaches its climax. The lights emanating from the 7 ritual stones intensify dramatically. In the recordings, we see Elena and Miguel in the center of the elephant habitat, Eduardo and Sofia among the wolves, all apparently in states of hypnotic fascination. Marco remains kneeling next to the central stone of the basement, his expression a mix of awe and intense concentration. At 02:15 sharp, something extraordinary happens. Something that the cameras only partially capture, distorted by electrical interference and visual anomalies. A wave of light energy appears to pulse from the central stone, radiating throughout the zoo. For about 27 seconds, all cameras show only a white flash. When the images return, at 02:01, what the cameras reveal defies understanding. In several enclosures, animals now move with unmistakably human postures and gestures. Not only imitate humanity, but incorporate it into your movements and behaviors. At the same time, in the recordings, showing the humans, Marco in the basement, the others in the enclosures, we notice subtle but undeniable changes in their postures, movements, and facial expressions. Something animal emerges in their gestures, in their ways of moving. The last clear images of the night show Marco emerging from the basement at 02:17. His movements subtly altered, a new feline grace in his step. Looking directly into one of the cameras, he smiles, a smile that seems both human and inhuman, before shutting down the main security system. For 3 hours, there are no images. The only evidence of what occurred during this period are fragments of distorted audio and some images captured by Marco's personal cameras that continue to function intermittently, powered by batteries. When the first morning lights illuminate the zoo at 5:43 a.m. On October 1st, cameras outside briefly show 6 figures leaving the complex. Figures moving in strange ways, half upright, half hunched over. Their faces are not clearly visible, but their silhouettes suggest a disturbing mix of human and non-human features. They carry with them various objects, including what appear to be ancient ritual stones taken from their foundations. The zoo they leave behind is silent and empty. When the transfer team arrives at 07:30, they find all the compounds inexplicably open. There are no animals left in the place. The metamorphosis was complete. The temple had claimed its guardians, and the barrier between man and beast, artificially maintained by millennia of civilization, had temporarily dissolved, leaving the rituals, participants transformed in ways that modern science would not have the tools to understand. The last image recovered from that night, a page from Marco's diary, apparently written shortly after the ritual, found trapped in one of the chambers. We are no longer just observers or observed. We are both simultaneously. The barrier was never real. It was an illusion we constructed to separate ourselves from the rest of life on Earth. Tonight, I remembered what it means to exist across the full spectrum of consciousness, and I am not alone in this memory. Cap, 8 February 5th, 2:27 p.m. 4 months after the events that occurred at the municipal zoo, a police surveillance drone flies over the dense area of the Northern Forest Reserve, 27 kilometers from the urban limits. The recording, later classified as confidential by the Department of Special Investigation, captures the first images of what official reports would call anomalous settlement in a conservation area. Seen from above, the community appears to emerge organically from the forest landscape itself. Structures integrated into the trees and natural formations, almost indistinguishable from the surrounding forest to the untrained eye. There are no clear separations between human and animal zones. The shelters, made from natural and reclaimed materials, are arranged in a circular pattern that, later analyzed by experts, reveals precisely the same configuration as the ritual points of the Temple of Therion. The initial police report, narrated by Detective Carlos Ferreira, establishes the clinical tone that the authorities would try to maintain in the face of the inexplicable. We have confirmed the presence of an unauthorized settlement in the restricted area of the Northern Reserve, Sector 7, approximately 1520, visible housing structures occupied by an undetermined number of individuals. Notable absence of modern technology or conventional infrastructure. Most significant is the apparent coexistence between humans and various wild animals, without visible barriers or signs of confinement. The drone video captures extraordinary moments. A middle-aged man sharing a meal next to what appears to be An adult grey wolf. A young woman surrounded by birds that show no fear, perching on her shoulders and arms. A child playing with puppies that appear to be normally incompatible species. Most disturbing to researchers is that all visible humans move with an unusual quality of movement. Fluid, restrained, almost predatory in their grace. On February 12th, a reconnaissance team consisting of 2 police investigators, a forensic psychiatrist, and a biologist specializing in animal behavior approached the community perimeter. Their body cameras provide the first documented contact with the inhabitants. The recording shows a clearing in the forest where 3 individuals are waiting for the team, as if they had anticipated their arrival. Among them, Marco Alves is immediately recognizable, although deeply transformed. His posture is upright but relaxed, his movements precise and economical. The most notable thing is its eyes. The left iris is still human, dark brown, while the right has the vertical pupillary slit characteristic of felines. The initial dialogue, tense and surreal, was transcribed from the recording. Investigator Ribeiro. Mr. Alves, Marco Alves, I am Investigator Ribeiro of the Civil Police. We are here to check on your well-being and that of the other former employees of the zoo. Marco tilts his head slightly in a gesture reminiscent of feline curiosity. We knew they would come eventually. We're all fine. Better than fine, actually. Dr. Pinto, psychiatrist. Mr. Alves, we would like to know what happened the night the zoo closed. 6 people disappeared, including you. Marco. No one disappeared, Doctor. We just expanded. Gesture encompassing the surrounding forest. No one is held here against their will. No one is lost or confused. We simply remember something that most humans have forgotten. Dr. Santos, biologist, noticeably disturbed by the presence of an adult leopard resting peacefully just 2 meters away. How is this coexistence possible? These are natural predators. This violates all known principles of animal behavior. Marco, smiling. Only the principles you know, Doctor. There are older forms of coexistence that predate your taxonomies and categories. Predator and prey are recent concepts in the long history of life. As the investigation continued over the following weeks, the team documented increasingly disturbing aspects of the community. The residents, the 6 missing zoo employees, plus approximately 20 other individuals whose origins have not been determined, demonstrated unexplained abilities to communicate with the animals. Not a mere interpretation of behavior, but a complex 2-way communication through vocalizations, gestures, and postures that are impossible to fake. More disturbing, all of the humans in the community exhibited what medical reports classified as unexplained physiological modifications, altered pupils, changes in muscle structure, expanded sensory capabilities documented in tests. These were not cosmetic or superficial changes, but rather fundamental modifications that defied any medical explanation. On March 1st, the investigation team recovered a precious artifact, Marco's final diary, begun the night of the transformation and continued for the following months. The pages revealed the internal perspective of someone who had crossed a border considered impassable. What we experienced was not a simple exchange, but a fusion. We now have dual consciousnesses, part human, part animal. Some, like me, carry the essence of the tiger. Others have received the essence of the wolf, owl, and snake. The animal personality does not override the human or eliminate it. They integrate, creating an expanded consciousness that perceives and experiences the world through a dual lens. The artifacts of the temple, the entrance stones, have been preserved. On new moons, we can facilitate the transformation to others who are ready, who feel the call. We do not force anyone. The transformation must be received willingly, with complete understanding. We are rebuilding what was lost millennia ago, when humans and animals shared an understanding that was forgotten when civilization erected physical and conceptual barriers between species. This is not an aberration, but a restoration, a return to a form of consciousness that existed long before cities, written languages, and scientific taxonomies that insist on separating what has always been connected. Especially revealing was the entry from January 23rd, which describes the purpose of the community. We did not create this place to escape civilization, but to serve as a bridge between worlds. A living reminder that the barrier between humans and animals is artificial, built through millennia of self-deception. With each new moon, more people join us, people who feel the calling, who recognize the fragmentation within themselves and seek integration. The separation was never natural. The division was never the original plan. Ever since we erected the first fences to keep animals out or in, we began to forget our fundamental connection to all conscious life. The zoo was the perfect symbol of that separation. The human observer, the animal observed, the grid between them. But what happens when that grid is removed? When the observer and the observed recognize each other as equivalent consciousnesses? The investigation reached its turning point on March 18th, when higher authorities intervened, classifying the entire case. The final report, written by Detective Ferreira, reveals the authorities' dilemma in the face of the inexplicable. After a thorough evaluation, the research team recommends that no forcible action be taken against the North Reserve community. The individuals do not demonstrate aggressive behavior or harmful intentions. The physiological changes observed do not appear to be the result of technological or pharmacological intervention, which defies conventional medical explanation. For official documentation purposes, we will classify the settlement as an alternative community with isolated ritual practices and shared delirium phenomenon. This classification will allow for continuous monitoring without the need for disruptive intervention that could have unpredictable consequences. Additional recommendation: restrict public access to the surrounding area during new moon periods under the pretext of ongoing ecological studies. What the official reports do not mention, but Detective Ferreira's personal recordings do reveal, is the inexplicable fascination that the community had on the investigators. 3 members of the original team requested the withdrawal of the case after repeated visits to the settlement. One of them, biologist Dr. Santos, never returned from his last visit scheduled for March 27th, coincidentally the night of the new moon. The transformation wasn't over last night at the zoo. It had just begun. May 3rd, 9:17 p.m. In a secluded surveillance room in the basement of the Department of Special Investigations, 2 screens show real-time images of what is now called Restricted Area 27. The first shows a thermal aerial view of the community in the Northern Forest Reserve, points of light representing life forms moving in coordinated patterns across the central clearing. The second shows a newly installed perimeter fence, apparently for environmental protection, with strategically placed motion sensors. On the table lies the official closing report of Case 237A, Municipal Zoo Incident. 17 pages of carefully constructed explanations and scientifically acceptable conclusions. The document is a masterpiece of bureaucratic rationalization, transforming the inexplicable into something that can be filed away and forgotten. Collective psychological dysfunction resulting from prolonged work stress. Isolated sect that practices syncretic rituals based on local mythologies. Possible environmental contaminants at former zoo facility causing shared hallucinations. Structural damage to the site's foundation creating infrasound propagation, which is known to cause anomalous perceptual experiences. No mention of the Ace, Temple of Therion. There is no reference to documented physical transformations. There is no explanation for the missing animals that have never been located in any other zoo or sanctuary. The system prefers to ignore what it cannot explain. Classify, archive, to forget. However, the surveillance cameras remain. Monitoring remains uninterrupted. The authorities may deny it publicly, but privately the fear persists. What if it spreads? The thermal screen shows the community gradually expanding. Every new moon brings new points of light. People disappear from nearby towns, usually those who do not have close ties. those who would not be missed much. A pattern emerges in the profiles. Individuals with a strong affinity for animals, pet store employees, veterinarians, former employees of other zoos, animal rights activists, people who already felt the fragility of the barrier. Recordings recovered from Detective Ferreira's phone, dating back to his last official visit on April 4th, provide a rare glimpse of an outside perspective attempting to understand the community. I spoke to Marco again today. He seems at peace. There's something deeply unsettling and yet alluring about the way he moves now, as if every gesture is precisely calibrated, with no energy wasted. His eyes, I still can't maintain eye contact with that feline iris. The hardest thing to rationalize. Is the harmony visible here? Natural predators coexisting without aggression. Humans with physical capabilities impossible to explain physiologically. These are not tricks or illusions. I witnessed how Eleanor, the former veterinarian, communicated with a pack of wolves through complex vocalizations that an expert later confirmed were linguistically structured. The community is building something in the farthest reaches of their territory, a sort of circular structure that matches the design of the ancient temple. Marco mentioned that the circle is closing and that the balance is being restored. When asked directly about his future plans, he simply smiled and said, "We're not planning, we're remembering." On the last night of the new moon, April 25th, perimeter sensors detected unusual activity. The thermal cameras showed a pattern of movement that analysts described as coordinated migration. Dozens of shapes moving in perfect synchronization through the forest to the exact edge of the monitored perimeter, where they stopped simultaneously. For exactly 17 minutes, the shapes remained motionless on the invisible border. Then, as if obeying an inaudible signal, they returned to the community. The incident report dryly notes behavior suggesting a deliberate testing of the limits of vigilance. They know they are being watched, and they are looking back. The site of the old municipal zoo remains empty, a partially demolished concrete skeleton. The shopping complex project was mysteriously delayed after several unexplained accidents during initial excavations. Rumors among workers speak of strange sounds coming from underground and shadows that move when no one is looking. A recent local news report points out the curious phenomenon of increasingly frequent sightings of wild animals on the outskirts of abandoned land. Species that would normally avoid urban areas now appear regularly, eyeing passing humans with unnerving intensity. The last entry recovered from Marco's diary, dated April 30th, offers both a warning and an invitation. The barrier was never real. The separation was always artificial. Soon, more humans will begin to remember what it means to exist in a full spectrum of consciousness. Not quite human, not quite animal, but something more integrated, more true. When you see us looking, remember, we see you too, and soon you will understand. On the next new moon, show yourself at the edge of the forest. A part of you already knows that you belong here. A part of you has always known it. The next new moon is tomorrow. The cameras continue to roll, silently capturing the beginning of something that science cannot name and bureaucracy cannot classify. Something old waking up again, something that perhaps should never have been forgotten. The zoo's metamorphosis was just the beginning.